Bitcoin hits a fork in the road, but will it propel the digital currency into mainstream financial markets? I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg West. Coming up, PayPal makes its first acquisition since breaking off from eBay. It's a mobile commerce startup named Modest. I speak with the co-founder. Plus, messaging app Kik gets a $1 billion valuation after funding from Tencent. Kik's co-founder tells me why it will be the WeChat of the West. And Intel's plan to take the reality TV world by storm. All of that and more on Bloomberg West. First, to our lead. Bitcoin facing something of an identity crisis. Developers Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen released a software upgrade called Bitcoin XT over the weekend. It's designed to help Bitcoin process more transactions as demand and activity go up. Supporters say that without this upgrade, Bitcoin will hit a bottleneck sometime next year. And even though there are plenty of critics, more than 8% of the Bitcoin community has already installed this upgrade. So what does it mean for the future of Bitcoin? I'm joined now by Bloomberg News reporter Olga Karif, who's been covering this for us, Anthem Vault CEO Anthem Blanchard, who operates Hayek, a gold-linked cryptocurrency, and Forrester principal analyst James McQuivey. Olga, I want to start with you. What exactly is Bitcoin XT, and why did developers see such a need for it?
So the whole conversation centers on exactly how does Bitcoin scale. So supporters of Bitcoin would like to see it grow as big as a platform as, for instance, Visa. And for that to happen, basically, some of the technical characteristics of Bitcoin have to change, they argue. And there are two camps that some of them agree that this technical change is necessary and others disagree, and this is the result.
Now, Anthem, you're against this. Why?
Well, my main reason, Emily, is because you have really two outlier programmers, I would say, that don't have PhDs, and you have a consensus of core programmers, dozen that do, and there hasn't really been sufficient peer review. There's a big consensus with the core developers that this has been rushed, and I think we're seeing that from the lack of adoption so far with the miners. At the end of the day, this is all a big experiment. We'll see what happens, but that's my main reason from a core programming standpoint. I'm not a programmer, but I like to listen to PhDs and the experts, so that's very important to me.
All right, well, James is something of an expert. You know, James, this has been described as a real threat to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's MySpace moment, potentially. What do you think?
Well, think of this really as kind of the Y2K of Bitcoin, a moment where, gee, we didn't plan ahead to where this computing technology would need to grow and scale beyond our initial aspirations. So Bitcoin is actually going to hit a wall. It's just a question of whether or not after that wall, whatever solution they come up with in the meantime can be done quickly enough to inspire enough confidence among the broader community so that when that wall is passed and we're past the hurdle, there's still a Bitcoin business instead of, like, as you referred to MySpace. You know, MySpace was one of the first social networks, and now it's basically gone because it couldn't make it past its early growth phase. There is a risk that if Bitcoin doesn't solve this problem, they will be in a similar situation.
So what about that wall, Anthem? What is the opportunity here for other digital currencies? I mean, there are many people who are saying that a cryptocurrency is the future, but maybe it's not Bitcoin.
Well, I think one of the big things people like about Bitcoin is the fact that it's immutable, so it can't be changed in terms of the ledger, and also that the idea that there's a fixed number of Bitcoin and block size. And so I think one of the issues is that by increasing the number of transactions per block, it ultimately will lower the price of the Bitcoin, small b, the currency, because ultimately more transactions will go through. So Bitcoin is layer 0. We've seen other layers. Counterparty is what our product, our beta product, Hayek Gold, is built on. So it's just like the internet. There are multiple layers, and I think it's really important that we have stability and we do things in a very smart, intelligent, best practices way. And that's where I think getting these PhD core developers, we have to really understand why is it that they're not on board. And I don't think that that's really clear yet.
James, is this essential to Bitcoin becoming more of a mainstream currency? Like, if this doesn't happen, is Bitcoin, could Bitcoin see its end?
You know, I don't disagree with Anthem about trying to do it right. I do, however, feel very concerned that we're not just talking about a technology issue or even a financial issue. There is a psychological issue. The people who have decided over the last 3-4 years that Bitcoin is something that they're going to trust, they have to maintain that trust. And so there is a tension between the technology. If we take too long to solve the technology, but the trust disappears in the meantime, that is a problem. And it does open the door for other people to say, okay, Bitcoin was good. It taught us some things. It helped us realize that in fact, alternate currency is a real viable thing. But now we're going to move on. And I think that's the existential risk that Bitcoin is up against.
And the price has plummeted now. It's just over $200. You know, should we read anything into that?
Well, it's actually been in decline for quite some time now. So, you know, from its peak of close to 1,000 just a few years ago, when people have started as any kind of a fever that catches the market, it goes up, it then levels out as people get more realistic about it. I think Anthem's point is a good one, that if we don't solve this problem, or if we solve it with a technology that actually loosens the supply, we know what happens when you loosen monetary supply, it devalues the currency, and that is a real risk here.
All right, well, we're going to keep watching. James McQuivey of Forrester Research, Anthem Vault CEO Anthem, Blanchard, and Olga Karif of Bloomberg News. Thank you all so much for joining us. Well, PayPal made its first acquisition since splitting from eBay. The payments giant purchased Modest, a mobile commerce startup founded by President Obama's former campaign CTO, Harper Reid. I spoke with Reid about this deal. Take a listen.
What the future holds is being able to purchase things in the context of which you are seeing them. So whether that's on a Facebook or a Twitter, or what I'm very excited about, things that haven't yet been invented, being able to purchase that and take advantage of that thing right when you see it is where is that future. And I think the thing that's hard right now is solving that problem from a technology standpoint is difficult, especially for the retailer. And so we hope to make it much easier.
Reid has referred to the deal as a cheat code to scale. I asked how the deal could help both businesses expand more quickly.
I'm sure that PayPal could achieve all sorts of great things, you know, without us. But the exciting thing is the cheat code that I was referring to is that we, Modest, were focusing on this great product, these great innovations, these inventions that we had created. And then when you look at who has the most scale, Braintree, which is such a neat company, has this great scale and is able to instantly kickstart us into appealing towards consumers all over the world. And that's where the cheat code really comes into play.
If you recognize Reid, he's been on the show before. He was the CTO for President Obama's campaign. I asked if he's considering getting involved in 2016.
I think that I have enough campaigns for me. I guess if Barack Obama runs for president again, maybe I'll consider signing up, but thankfully that is prohibited by the Constitution.
Still to come, Airbnb is looking for a CEO in China with the help of 2 Chinese VC firms. We will discuss. Plus, Kik, the messaging app, joins the Unicorn Club, why its co-founder thinks it can play with Facebook and Snapchat in the big leagues. Now to a story we are watching. SoftBank's president is making a big wager. Nikesh Arora will purchase $483 million worth of company shares in what he calls a personal bet. When the transaction is complete, Arora will be the second biggest shareholder after founder Masayoshi Son. Now to Airbnb, the home-sharing startup is joining a quickly growing list of U.S.-based companies expanding into China, including Uber and LinkedIn. In a statement, Airbnb said in just the last year alone, outbound travel from Chinese guests through Airbnb has grown 700%, making it our fastest-growing outbound market. Airbnb also partnered up with 2 Chinese venture capital firms, China Broadband Capital and Sequoia China. Their first order of business to hire a CEO for Airbnb in China. Joining me now to discuss, Hans Tung, Managing Director at GGV Capital, is also working with Airbnb on their China strategy. You're investors in the latest round. You're meeting with Airbnb this afternoon. What makes you think that Airbnb can succeed where so many tech companies, U.S. tech companies in China, have failed?
Good question. I think in China, you're now seeing with the success of iPhones that they're growing block of Chinese consumers who actually want to have more westernized lifestyle and taste.
But what about the government? I mean, is the government going to allow this?
I think the government is pretty savvy at dealing with U.S. internet companies who could do well in China. I think the Chinese government is extending its influence using the consumption power of China as a market to improve relations with companies and entities outside of China.
But with Facebook being blocked, Twitter being blocked, so many companies saying we're not even going to try China at all, what makes Airbnb different?
I think media and commerce are two separate categories. As you know, media is a lot more regulated and there's a lot more oversight in that part of the internet value chain, whereas commerce, cross-border commerce, are being promoted by Chinese government.
I recently sat down with the CTO and co-founder of Airbnb to talk about their China strategy at the Bloomberg Technology Conference.
Right.
Take a listen to what Nathan had to say about Airbnb's expansion in China.
China as a country, as a source of travelers, is growing faster than any other country in the entire world, over 5x year over year. Incredible growth. And, it's really an amazing thing. There's a growing middle class. Increasingly, the first thing they want to do is experience the world. Many of them have not left the country ever before. China now represents, is number one in terms of international tourism expenditure. It was $100 billion back in 2013. They estimated it would double again over 5 years. To put that in comparison, the next two highest are the U.S. and Germany, which are tied at $80 billion. So the future of international travel is really the Chinese tourist.
Now, what's interesting here is that they're looking for a CEO of Airbnb in China, and they're working with these two venture capital firms, China Broadband and you. China Broadband Capital, Sequoia China. We know GGV, but we don't know these other guys. Who are they, and who else have they helped get into China?
Well, China Broadband, Edward Tian has been a very pioneering entrepreneur. He started Asia Info. He was part of China Netcom. Netcom is now part of China Unicom, the number 2 telecom operator in China. So he is experienced with the telecom side of things. And Sequoia China is started by Neil Shen, who founded Ctrip, one of the co-founders of Ctrip, and is part of the exactly. And it's linked with Sequoia here in the U.S.
So do they have government connections that these companies need, that Airbnbs need?
I think in the process of doing and making investments in the internet space in China, you inevitably interact with Chinese government officials. So we love to help Chinese, U.S. internet companies to meet with the right folks in China to help to facilitate more communication, avoid misunderstanding, and figure out middle ground to work together.
Now, one of the interesting, I lived in China. Every time you check into a hotel, you have to give them your passport. They have to scan your passport. Right. They hold on to that information. How does Airbnb handle that side of things?
Well, for the Chinese government, they prefer to have people have records of staying, right, especially for foreigners. So that obviously applies to anyone who operates a business in China. So it is up to the host to deal with such matter.
So they're doing that. The hosts are doing that? It's up to the host to do that.
It's up to the host. Okay. And the government is right now encouraging to be open about more ways to collaborate on the e-commerce side. And we'll see what happens as the scale grows.
Now, it's interesting that they're looking for a CEO of Airbnb China. Could Uber, for example, benefit from something like that? Uber's also expanding into China, but they've run into many issues as well. Their offices were just raided.
I think transportation is a lot more regulated as a sector. So Uber has its challenges with any Chinese startup in that space to deal with that.
But what other companies could benefit from having a CEO in China? What other kinds of companies looking to expand? I mean, is that the way to get into China?
I think the way to do it in China is find the right local partner. We'll be happy to help.
Yeah.
And then have more communication and dialogue with the Chinese government, because it's important to figure out what is the right middle ground that both sides can accept to make the production productive. Then you also need to have a China CEO who has some kind of localized decision-making power to make adjustments. As with any companies in China, in the internet space, you have to make adjustments for the Chinese local situation.
So what's been your advice to Airbnb throughout this process? There is a Chinese version of Airbnb called Tujia, doing something quite similar, though it's even more built out. They have services, like cleaning services, that you can use around.
Well, we're an investor in Tujia. My partner Ji Xun is on the board. We think the two businesses are not directly competing with each other, to have different focus.
Why not?
Who knows? There could be a way to work together. I don't think Tujia has any desire, at least to my knowledge, to expand beyond China today. And in China, they focus more on vacation homes. So there could be ways to work together. All along, I always thought the Alibaba Yahoo model is something that most U.S. companies should think about, I wish Uber was an investor in Didi earlier. Then you wouldn't have the contingent situation we have today.
Right. You're an investor in Didi Kuaidi, which is Uber's
and we linked the Uber to meet Didi a long time ago, back in 2012.
Oh.
So
you think Uber should have done like a JV?
Everybody has to decide what they want to do, but we're very supportive of the Ali Yahoo strategy. I think Jerry did a great job of working that out with Jack Ma, and in the longer run, it's a more harmonious relationship.
So where's Airbnb going to expand next? I mean, they talked about Iran.
Well, I think Airbnb is amazing, right? This past summer, they have over, 1 million stays in one night, and that's a record. One of the reasons we're investing in Airbnb is that it's amazing service and amazing community, and we don't see anybody else doing something similar around the world. And we'd like to see more Chinese travelers travel on Airbnb.
All right. Well, we'll be watching. Hans Tung of GGV Capital, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to have you here on the show. Turning now to a Chinese company investing in a North American startup, Tencent, the parent company of WeChat, invested $50 million into the messaging app Kik. This gives the app a valuation of $1 billion. I spoke to Kik co-founder and CTO Chris Best about the comparison and the race to build a chat platform.
When we say WeChat of the West, we're talking about building a chat platform. So all of the messaging apps have to do with communication and being able to message your friends and your family, which is sort of the most important use of most people's smartphones. But to go beyond that, to become a chat platform, is about enabling interaction with more things than just people. So we're talking about apps, games, businesses, and WeChat is a shining example of this with what they've done in China, where you can order a taxi on WeChat, to buying stuff on WeChat, to refinancing your mortgage on WeChat. So we think that the next race is for the chat platform.
Up next, the newest reality TV star could be sponsored by Intel. Details of the chipmaker's foray onto the small screen next. And hackers are having quite an affair with cheating website Ashley Madison today. As we head to break, check out today's launch of an unmanned Japanese rocket filled with supplies for the International Space Station. It is time now for the Daily Bite, one number that tells a whole lot, and today's number is 32 million. That's the number of adultery-seeking Ashley Madison users that were exposed by hackers today. If you remember, the data was stolen over a month ago, and the hackers, who call themselves the Impact Team, said they would release the data if the cheating website remained active. Today they made good on that promise, and names, street and email addresses, phone numbers were all posted to the dark web. Out of the 32 million names posted, 15,000 are said to have .mil or .gov email addresses. Well, Intel is getting into the reality TV business. You heard that right. CEO Brian Krasanich and Survivor creator Mark Burnett announced a deal at the company's developers forum yesterday. The upcoming show, called America's Greatest Makers, will be a $1 million prize contest to create the best wearable device. But with growth in its PC chip making business declining and a stock price that's down more than 20% so far this year, is it a smart way to jazz up Intel's image? Joining me now to discuss from LA, our Bloomberg News media reporter Lucas Shaw, and still with us, James McQuivey of Forrester Research. So, James, is this a smart branding move? Is this grasping for straws? How does this strike you?
It smacks a little bit of desperation. Don't get me wrong, the idea is a great idea. It's surprising no one thought of this before, but for Intel to put its brand behind this is pretty risky, really, given that its brand isn't in the strongest of positions in the last few years anyway. So I'll be surprised whether they can meet the expectations of reality TV viewers who are watching Shark Tank and The Apprentice while still making it build their brand.
That said, I mean, Mark Burnett is no slouch. Lucas, what's your take on this?
I mean, I think there are two things at work here. One is that technology just occupies a far larger part of culture than it once did, between social media and different consumer-facing tech companies, whether you say Uber or Airbnb. And Hollywood tends to reflect whatever's happening in society. So you have one of the biggest shows on HBO is set in Silicon Valley, titled Silicon Valley. And so it was bound to happen that you were going to have some reality shows set in that same world. The other part is that I think Hollywood hopes that if you have a tech show, you'll appeal to a younger demo. You see with all the TV networks, the average viewer tends to be going up. And so whether it's partnering with Intel or putting a YouTube star in the middle of a show, they're trying to reach people who might tune in who are between the age of 20 and 40.
GE is sponsoring its own show called Breakthroughs with Ron Howard. Is this a continuing trend?
Yeah, there's actually a story in one of the entertainment trades this morning that on the fiction side that I think NBC or CBS was working on a comedy that was loosely inspired by the People You May Know feature on Facebook. You're definitely going to see more and more shows, whether it's nonfiction reality or fiction, that are set in the world of tech.
James, even though you think it's a little bizarre, do you see, could Intel actually incorporate some of these ideas into its business, or is this purely a branding opportunity?
Purely a branding opportunity. If you think about it, if there's someone out there with the next big idea, they've already taken it to Kickstarter. They're not going to sit and wait and say, ooh, $1 million from Intel, who I then have to partner with for the next few years, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing. But you don't have to wait for the big guys to hand you the money anymore. That's the change of the digital economy. You can go out and get the money yourself on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and I think those ideas are already out there.
So if not start a reality show, what does Intel really need to do to get its business back in line?
It comes back to putting some amazing products back out onto the market. The problem that Intel has is the Microsoft problem. You've been known for doing one thing for so long, and it's the thing that makes your shareholders happiest. And now that thing isn't as important to the world as it used to be. You've got to innovate. Microsoft's done a pretty good job starting to innovate. They've come up with a variety of new products, new services, cloud services, and so on. We're not seeing that innovation out of Intel, and moving your brand forward is not going to be sufficient.
All right. Well, the show's coming out next year. I'm a little curious. I'll be watching. James McQuivey of Forrester Research, thanks so much for joining us, as well as Lucas Shaw, our Bloomberg News reporter who covers media. Thank you both. And that is it for this edition of Bloomberg West. Tomorrow on the show, we've got full details on the latest results from Salesforce and HP. We'll see you then. That's it today from San Francisco.